Welcome back into the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage. Seriously, welcome back in because it's been a little while. Sometimes life happens, sometimes pandemics happen, and that's what happened to me. I had a wedding that I had to miss for, and then Sap subsequently, when you go to a 250-person wedding in Florida, odds are you're going to get COVID, and that's exactly what happened to me.
Well, I know we had contact after you let me know that you were ill, but I'm glad that you're sounding and feeling so much better. And, I'm glad that everything turned out okay. And when you put 250 people in a hall together in Florida where no one's wearing masks, this is going to happen. So, you're stronger for it, though.
Yeah, I'm glad my wife somehow avoided it, so that's good too. Her vaccine, I guess, worked a little bit better than mine. But, the good thing about being sick, if there is one good thing, is no one bothers you when you want to just sit in bed all day and watch basketball. So I was able to sit in bed all day and watch basketball, basically. So don't worry, just because we were off for a little bit of time doesn't mean that Sap and I are any less on top of our game in terms of paying attention to every little detail that's going on in the NBA. And while we can't talk about in one show everything that's happened in the past couple of weeks while we've been off, we can certainly take a look at where the NBA is today. And the gap in the two conferences has really closed amongst the top couple of seeds, especially in the East, where it looked like the Celtics and Bucks were sort of running away with it. Suddenly, the Brooklyn Nets went on a huge surge, an 11-game win streak. In fact, they just lost their first game in a while the other night to the Chicago Bulls, who seem to only beat good teams and lose to everybody else. And now the Nets are sitting just a game and a half behind the Celtics, as are the Milwaukee Bucks. And the Cleveland Cavaliers, your pick to come out of the East, Sap, they're just 2 games out of first place. And the Philadelphia 76ers are only 3 games out of first place. So the top 5 seeds in the East are just separated by 3 games, Sap, as it's gotten really, really tight as we're approaching about the midway point of the season.
Right. We're only a couple of games away from being at the midpoint. This season is just going quickly. And you look at the 8 best records in the NBA, they're separated by a grand total of 2 games in the loss column. The Celtics have 12 losses. Brooklyn, Milwaukee, Denver, and Memphis have 13 losses. Philadelphia, Cleveland, and New Orleans have 14 losses. So the 8 best records separated by 2 games in the loss column. That's how close the elite teams are in the NBA. And that doesn't even include a Dallas team, which is now 22-17 after getting off to a really slow start and playing much better basketball, although they were blown out by the Celtics last night. We know that Dallas is always a team that people will fear because they have Luka Doncic, who's having an MVP caliber season. So the league is so deep when you look at the top teams, but also even the Midland teams, right? I think the Lakers are playing much better basketball. Golden State's kind of recovering a little bit without Steph Curry, believe it or not. You look in the East, you got teams like the Knicks and Indiana that are much tougher than we anticipated. Atlanta's kind of hovering around there.
The Thunder the Celtics by like 50 points the other day.
Right. They're 16-22. And I really look at the standings, and there's only about 5 really awful teams in the league. San Antonio and Houston in the West. I'd say Detroit because Kate Cunningham's out for the year. Charlotte's really bad. Even an Orlando team beat the Celtics twice at TD Garden, and they're kind of a pesky team as well. So the league is much more competitive than it's ever been. And I think that's a good thing for the league, because when we look forward to the playoffs, which are still, 4 months away, even the first round matchups are going to be interesting, especially in the East, where seeding is going to be so important, because a 4-5 matchup, you could have Cleveland playing Philadelphia. I mean, that's a great first round matchup.
Yeah, that's what it is today. And I mean, that's certainly a really tough one. And look at who the 8th seed in the Heat is the Heat right now in the Eastern Conference. They represented the Eastern Conference Finals last year, took the Celtics to 7 games. They're game over 500 right now. They haven't played great, but in terms of an 8 seed, we've had some really piss poor 8 seeds over the years. That's a very strong one. I'm not saying, that they're championship bound or anything like that. And then the 9th seed right now in the East, the Atlanta Hawks, who 2 years ago were in the Eastern Conference Finals, and the Bulls are the 10 seed in the East. They beat the Nets the other night. They've beaten the Celtics a couple of times. Like you said, Sap, there's really, in a year we thought so many teams were going to be tanking for Big Vic, as you like to call him, Victor Wembanyama out of France, or Scoot Henderson from the G League. Thus far, really, like you said, only those 4 teams have really separated themselves as sort of the dregs of the NBA, where you can just sort of pencil in a win: Detroit, Charlotte, Houston, San Antonio. And the rest of them on any given night, they're going to give you a hard time. So the league, we've talked about this a million times, Sep. It's as deep as it's ever been, as you just mentioned. And you're going to go against at least one, oftentimes 2 guys that are legit all-star caliber players every single night. Every team has them. That's how deep the league is. That you can make an argument for. With the first all-star returns came out, so many guys you can make a case for being all-stars this year.
Yeah, and MVP candidates. I know we're going to talk about that a little bit later in the podcast, but there's so many players having MVP caliber seasons. Now, it appears to me that the stats are on steroids, right, this year. I mean, you've got...
Oh, you get getting outrageous.
It's almost like, baseball 20 years ago with home runs. You get Donovan Mitchell put up 71 points. Obviously, Luka Doncic had a 60-point, 21 rebound, 10 assist night. He's sensational. When he doesn't score 30 points, the Mavericks are 2-10. He may be the truest of MVP candidates because there's Luka and a bunch of other guys. He really reminds me of LeBron in his first 6-7 years. The first time around in Cleveland, where it was LeBron and some other guys, and he made them competitive because he was so great. Same thing with Luka. But I also think that you see that the pace of the play in the NBA is faster than it's been in decades. I mean, you have to go back to like the 60s when the pace was very, very fast. But just three-point shooting, 15 years ago, the average NBA game had 36 three-point attempts. Now it's up to 69 three-point attempts per game, nearly double. So you're going to just see more points, faster pace. The skill level of these guys is incredible. Every night, someone's putting up 45, 50 points. Didn't Lauri Markkanen have 45 the other night? I mean, he's a nice
people
player.
Are hitting career highs almost on a weekly basis. You're seeing somebody has a new career high.
Old man LeBron is averaging nearly 30 points per game in his 20th season, and he's playing at an MVP level, except his team's not good enough to really get him into the discussion. Kevin Durant's playing at an MVP level.
Absolutely.
And a lot of people thought that he was going to be disengaged this year, but look, Brooklyn's been the best team the last month. And let's not forget, Jet, that a year ago, right at this time, Brooklyn had the best record in the Eastern Conference. Then Durant got hurt. Kyrie kind of went off the reservation. Yep. Kyrie did Kyrie things, and then they had to be in the play-in. But if they're focused with Durant and Kyrie, and if Ben Simmons does some of those little things that he can do, that's a good roster. So the East is incredibly deep, and I think the West is starting to shape up as well, because I think Golden State will get going at some point. And I think the Lakers, if Anthony Davis gets back, can be somewhat of a factor as well.
I don't know, Sap. They won last night. They beat a healthy Heat team with no Anthony Davis, no LeBron James. Maybe they should just go with the Russell Westbrook, Austin Reeves lineup. That could work. And Dennis Schroeder.
Sounds interesting. Yeah,
Dennis Schroeder
had a
three.
huge game.
Schroeder, Reeves, Westbrook. That's their big three.
Sounds like a law firm in Southern California. Do you realize that when both LeBron and Anthony Davis are off the floor, that the Lakers are minus 15 per 100 possessions, which is the worst in the league? So you can make a case without those two guys, they're terrible.
Other than that, the roster is awful. It's awful roster.
Horrible. It really is. But LeBron is playing at an incredibly high level. And before he got injured for the 12th time in his career, Anthony Davis was playing at an MVP level. If they get those guys healthy and keep them healthy, they could probably cause a lot of problems in the postseason with me, you, and our boss Ian Glendon as the three other guys in the starting lineup, because Davis and LeBron are still that good. I would be probably, what would I be in that lineup? Maybe Ian would be the small, you'd be the point guard. I'd be the off guard, and Ian would be the small forward. LeBron can handle whatever positions needed, and of course Anthony Davis could play the 5. I think we'd make a run at it.
I'd be the shooter. So I'll stand in the corner.
Okay, I'll be the point guard. I'll be a fat point guard. I'll be like John Bagley.
Yeah, I don't want to handle the ball. I just want to sit in the corner and shoot threes.
I like being a point guard. That's what I played when I was back in my playing days.
You're a good point guard, Sap, and on the radio, on podcasts, and in basketball. You're a point guard in many ways. But yeah, I mean, listen, I don't think anybody in the West has separated themselves and say, holy crap, this team is, no one's taking down this team. I like Denver a lot. You like Denver a lot. You had them coming out of the West. They're first place team in the West right now. They're in a tie with the Memphis Grizzlies. They have the exact same record at 25-13. Jokic again playing at an MVP level, trying to win his 3rd straight. But I don't think anybody can look at it and say, Oh yeah, they're hands down the best team in the West. Nobody's they're, no one's on their level. It's pretty deep in terms of the Western Conference as well, Sap. And just a quick aside, before we talk about the MVP candidates too, because there's many. You were talking about how scoring's up a lot because of the pace, a lot because of the 3-point shooting, and then you have Giannis, who just continues to score 40-point games and 50-point games without 3-pointers, which is pretty amazing. That he's the funniest thing, Sap, that I've noticed with all these is, I think someone tweeted this the other day, is we seeing all these like crazy scoring numbers. Like you said, Donovan Mitchell put up 71, which was the most since Kobe's game, his 81-point game against Toronto years back. And you will see, Giannis went for 40 and 20, 2 nights in a row. That's historic. And Luka is the 60. And then they'll show it comparatively. And they're like, oh yeah, well, Chamberlain did that 8 times during the 1964 season. It's like, it's just an unfair compare. It's honestly like if like Superman decided to play in, the NFL, or the Hulk decided to play in the NFL, play running back for one season. Like he would just, the numbers would be ridiculous. It's like Will Chamberlain, these numbers that we gawk at, he was literally doing that multiple times in the season. It's just sort of every time I see those numbers come up, you're like, wow, Luka Doncic 60-20. They're like, oh, Will Chamberlain, he did, he was averaging that one season.
Wilt averaged 50 and 25 one season and didn't win the MVP, believe it or not. Bill Russell won the MVP. Wilt put up ridiculous numbers. Kind of like Wayne Gretzky in hockey. When Wayne Gretzky was scoring over 200 points, I think he did it 4 or 5 times, which is just bonkers. When you consider a 100-point season is really good for a hockey player, this guy was putting up 200-point seasons. Babe Ruth, when he was dominant back in the 20s, was hitting as many home runs or more home runs than entire teams. Guys that just put up numbers that were just so far ahead of everyone else. Yeah, so and you look at Giannis, he does it more of a traditional way. He's not a really good 3-point shooter. I think he averages 3 3-pointers per game attempted, and he hits around 30%. He and LeBron are 2 of the worst 3-point shooters in the league. For some reason, LeBron keeps taking them. If he just could button up a little bit, maybe go to the basket a little bit more, he could lead the league in scoring. But it's a lot to ask a 38-year-old guy to strictly score, within the paint. As big and strong as he is, he's going to take a pounding. But Giannis, I still think is the best player in the league because of all these players we're going to talk about as potential MVP candidates. He's clearly the best defender, and that to me separates him from everyone else. But it is a fascinating race that we're going to talk about.
Yeah, well, so let's really dive into that right now, Saf, because I heard Sean Grandy say this the other night. He was on the Celtics broadcast filling in for Mike Gorman, and he said it's an MVP race like there's never been before. And yes, we're only halfway through the season, but if this holds, I don't know how the hell they're going to choose an MVP this season, Sep, because, a lot of guys have very legitimate cases and in any given year could win MVP. Just, looking at it right now, in terms of guys who I think have absolutely legitimate cases to be made, you got Luka Doncic, you have Jason Tatum, you have Giannis, you have Kevin Durant. Those are 4 guys who I think have extremely legitimate cases. Then I think Donovan Mitchell has a legitimate case at it too. I don't know if you agree with me there, Sap. Joel Embiid, I think, has a legitimate case, and obviously Nikola Jokic, I think, has a legitimate case. And then there's other guys who are in the periphery, like a John Morant, like a Zion Williamson, though he's hurt right now. It's a crazy amount of guys who are having unbelievable seasons that are seemingly how you're going to choose the winner. If it holds up this way, I don't know. They're going to have to split it 5 ways.
Yeah, split up the award, right? The inaugural Michael Jordan Award, right? Because that's what they're naming it after, Michael Jordan. I think in the truest sense of the word that Giannis is the best player in the league, but that Luka might be the MVP. And that's because Luka doesn't have much around him, or not much at all. And
nothing.
I think we saw Dallas play the Celtics just last night, and Tatum and Luka weren't really all that great. Tatum did end up with a triple-double. He got 4 assists in the fourth quarter. I don't know what he was doing on the court with a minute left in the game, or 2 minutes left in the game.
Missoula is terrible at that. He's real. I don't know what he's doing that.
Why is he out there? This is playing with fire when your best player, who's played more minutes than any player in the league since the bubble, you leave him out there to get a triple-double. Not cool with that, because you've got bigger goals. The goal is to win the NBA championship.
I agree.
I don't think Tatum was all that great last night. He did have a triple-double, but, I don't think Luka was up to Luka standards at all. Both guys shot poorly. And the Celtics won by 29 because Jason Tatum has a lot more around him than Luka has. I mean, is there any bigger gap on any team in the NBA between its best and second best player than there is in Dallas?
Definitely no.
I don't even think it comes close, right? I mean,
no.
Okay, Donovan Mitchell we love, but they've got some other Darius
They have
Garland.
they have other all-stars on that team, Seth. They have two other all-stars on that team.
Jared Allen's an all-star, and even Evan Mobley can be an all-star, right? I mean, obviously Durant's great, but Kyrie's darn good, and Jason Tatum's great, and Jaylen Brown is not too far behind. Yeah, even with Steph Curry, maybe Steph Curry's the other guy, because I think it's like Steph Curry and a bunch of other guys that are really good but not great. Maybe Klay Thompson, who put 54
but
recently,
I'm saying Thompson,
but he's got a bunch of guys that are really
Thompson,
good.
Poole, and Green are all better than anybody who's on the Mavs.
Oh yeah,
you take them over anybody after Luka, obviously.
Christian Wood and Dinwiddie are the second and third best players on Dallas.
Yeah, and you'd take Green or Poole over those guys, or Thompson.
Yeah, and Klay Thompson, and maybe Andrew Wiggins. I mean,
Wiggins too. You forget about Wiggins because he's been out of the lineup. But yeah, absolutely.
So I think in the truest sense of the word, Luke is the MVP. But I mean, if they go 44 and 38, which is about what they're on pace for, I think they'll do a little better because they're starting to play better. Can you win the MVP? I say the answer is yes, because Denver was the 6th seed last year, and Nikola Jokic won the MVP because he just put up ridiculous numbers, and obviously Luke is putting up ridiculous numbers as well. Giannis, to me, is the best player in the league, as I thought LeBron was for about a 15-year period. Didn't mean he was going to win the MVP every year. He certainly was in contention every year to be MVP, but there were narratives that would lead you in a different direction to selecting the MVP. I don't think Jokic really has a chance, as great as he is. And if Denver's the 1 seed and he puts up even better numbers than he put up last year, you could say, well, why isn't he the MVP? Well, there's only been one player in the history of the league that won 3 consecutive MVPs, and that was Larry Bird. As great as Nikola Jokic is, he's not Larry Bird. He's not far behind. I mean, he's putting up ridiculous numbers, but I think it's going to be difficult for him to win because of the narrative. That's a big part of the MVP voting.
Yeah. Voter fatigue is a real thing in any sport. It happens in football too. It happens in baseball. And it happens in hockey. It happens in basketball.
You know what's interesting though, Jet, is it's a great point. But for some reason, Barry Bonds won 4 straight National League MVPs.
Wasn't he lapping the field, Saf?
He was lapping the field.
How could you deny him? At that point,
and he probably should have won 2 more. In 2000, he finished a very close second to his teammate Jeff Kent, and back in 1991, he finished a close second to Terry Pendleton. Or he would have had 9 MVPs. But the thing with Bonds is he was despised by the media, but when you just looked at the numbers, it was like,
so is Jeff Kent.
We have to vote for him. So was Jeff Kent too. Yeah, it wasn't a real likable duo as far as the voters were concerned. You're right about that. I mean, actually, Bonds might be more likable than Kent. But
from everything I've heard, Jeff Kent was one of the biggest a-holes to ever play baseball.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other difference too, Jet, is that in baseball you have a National League MVP and an American League MVP. Now, I think Bonds probably would have won the Major League MVP award in all of those years. He was just like in a different stratosphere from everybody. Gretzky, I believe, won 8 in a row. It was almost like, this guy's just putting up incredible numbers. But you're right. In the NBA, there's so many good candidates, right? Like, I mean, right now as we sit here in early January, I mean, Jason Tatum, Giannis, Durant, Embiid, Jokic, and Luka. There's 6 guys that are all deserving of MVP.
And I'm telling you, Seb, Donovan Mitchell should be up there in that conversation too.
Yeah,
he should.
Sure.
I mean, they were pretty good last year. They missed, and I mean, he's turned them around to being they're a periphery title contender. I mean,
I think they're a real title contender.
If you put up, I know you do, but I'm saying for me, I think that's the perception of them. I mean, if they won the whole thing, I wouldn't be shocked. There's no world beater team out there. They could do it. If Donovan Mitchell plays like he did the other night, they could beat whoever. I don't care who you put in front of them. A dude scoring 71 points in a game, it's going to be pretty hard to beat that team.
And I don't think he was the most enthused guy about going to Cleveland either, right? He thought he was being traded to the Knicks. And then he went to Cleveland, and
that game must have hurt Knicks fans watching that 71-point game. Can you imagine if he did that at the Garden?
Oh, that would have been sensational. Yeah, that would have been even more impressive. And maybe if Steve Cohen owned the Knicks, Donovan Mitchell would be a member of the Knicks, because Donovan Mitchell's dad I believe still works for the Mets. So, there's that connection.
But-
Maybe Donovan Mitchell will be playing for the Mets next year as well, because Steve Cohen's got all sorts of money to throw around. They need
He's
a
probably
third
a good
baseman.
baseball player, right? His dad was
I'm
a
sure.
professional.
Yeah.
Wasn't his dad a professional?
I
Was
think
he a
so,
scout
yeah.
or was he a baseball player?
He's a scout from
scout.
what I understand, but I'm sure he played
So he's
the
got a
game at
good
some
mind
level.
for the game. We know that.
Yeah. Yeah. So why not? The Mets, have a $300 million payroll. They're still trying to figure out if they're going to sign Carlos Correa or not. So, maybe Donovan Mitchell make a good third baseman part-time once the NBA season's over, which I believe is going to be in June at some point for Cleveland. But yeah, Mitchell's a candidate. And look, LeBron's a candidate in terms of how he's played. It's just his team is sub 500. You can't really win the MVP from a team that isn't even in the play-in right now, but he's played at that level.
But I'm saying, and there's also the thing is true. There's guys whose team records aren't as good as those guys we just mentioned, but are playing in a average year at MVP caliber level, like a Ja Morant, like before he got hurt, Devin Booker was playing spectacular. Zion Williamson, his team's playing really good. He, I think has played at that type of level. And you can also look at guys who are not on great teams right now, have been playing really well this season, and I think should both be all-stars. Julius Randle is having a really great bounce back year after not being so great last year. And my guy, Tyrese Halliburton, who I picked for most improved player of the year, who might win that in a runaway, Sap, he's playing at a spectacular level too. I'm not saying they're MVP candidates, but that just shows how deep the league is in terms of, man, every night you're facing somebody who is really freaking good and you have to really key in on. And unfortunately, Kyrie Irving's also playing really good basketball. But
he really is.
That's all I want to say about that.
Okay, you can end the conversation there. The guy is extremely talented right now. He's an all-star starter at this point, which we'll see what happens as we go forward. But yeah, the talent level in this league is higher than it's ever been. The teams are deeper, and again, the talent pool is just wider. I mean, in the '80s, and this is why I always one of the reasons I put LeBron ahead of Jordan is when Jordan was dominant in the '90s, you really didn't have players from South America, Africa, and Europe. Now, half the top 10 players in the league are from where? Africa, Europe. Not right now, South America, but I mean, Giannis and Embiid technically, were from Africa. I know Giannis went to Greece and Embiid played at Kansas, but they were born there. Luka and the Joker are both European. So the 4 of the top 8 players in the league are not from the United States. That wasn't the case in 1996 when Jordan was, rolling through the NBA. I mean, Olajuwon, yes, but he also went through the college system and played at the University of Houston. But the talent level and the talent pool is just so deep compared to it was in the 80s and 90s. Again, this is the deepest the league's ever been in terms of individual talent and teams.
Without a doubt, Sap. And you and I both came into this season agreeing that Giannis is the best player in the world. I haven't been moved off of that. I don't. You're saying too. You haven't been moved off of that so far. I do think that Luka has closed the gap a little bit. I don't think that I said at the beginning of the season, Sap, I don't know if you remember, I thought it was a pretty big gulf between 1 and 2. I thought it was Giannis at 1, and then you could debate who was 2, but Giannis was 1 by a pretty wide margin. I think it's gotten a little bit more slim, but he's still got a pretty sizable lead because, like you said, the defense, and he's won a title before. Luka is at best average on defense, I'd say. And
top 5 in steals, whatever that means. I mean, Curry's been top 5 in steals, and we don't think of him as a great defender.
I mean, I don't think he's not a turnstile. But listen, when he has to do what he has to do offensively to win, like you said, Sap, when he doesn't score 30, they're 2 and 12. You said
2 and 10 when he doesn't score 30.
2 and 10. Okay, so like that, he's having to do a lot of work on the offensive end, obviously. So I think it's fair to withhold judgment. Is he going to be, Gary Payton or Dennis Rodman on the defensive side of the basketball? No, but I think he has room to be better. But because of the total package of Giannis, I still do believe he's number 1 by a comfortable margin. But because of how great Luka has been this season, I do think he has closed the gap a little bit. And I do think also that, Kevin Durant is making a very strong case also to be considered the second best player in the world right now.
Yeah, he's right there as well, right? So it's almost like you're building a pyramid. You got Giannis on top, maybe you've got Luka and Durant second and third, and then the third level would be what, like Tatum, Embiid, and Jokic. I mean, that seems to be a pretty good start to a pyramid. And
And
let's
LeBron.
not forget, LeBron's still there. I mean, LeBron can do everything that he needs to do. Just the team's not good, and he's not quite the force on defense. And look, although last week he put together a couple of really impressive back-to-back games, which is pretty good for a guy in his 20th year at the age of 38. So you put LeBron in there, John Morant's at that next level, and a few other players that you can make a case for. So, and Steph Curry's a guy who, before he got hurt, was putting up 37 and 7.
Yeah, he belongs on that. He's in that
always
top 10
in
list
there
as well.
Yeah, he's
sure.
always in there.
Undoubtedly.
Yeah. It's just that with Durant as the size, and he's really unstoppable. The other night, 44 points on 22 shots. I mean, he's the most efficient scorer I've ever seen. Other than the big guys who are
he does that whenever he wants to.
I mean, obviously, Shaq shot 62% from the floor, and but in terms of all-around efficiency, I mean, you throw in the free throw shooting. Durant's the most efficient, great scorer I've ever seen. That includes Jordan, Kobe, LeBron, pick whoever.
Except just, you keep talking about Durant in a second. This is just a quick point I want to make. I was looking at his numbers, I think, on a tweet. He's actually been better statistically after his Achilles injury. If you look at his raw number, which makes no sense, but he has. If you just go and look at the pure numbers, he's been better.
See a pitcher after Tommy John surgery, throws harder.
That happens.
Justin Verlander.
It doesn't happen with Achilles, but it does happen with Tommy John.
He could score playing in slippers, right? And like not moving. I mean, he's just that good. He's I've compared him to Aaron Rodgers, and Aaron Rodgers to him in terms of just they're gifted. Like Roger throwing the football, like at the age of 50, I think he could still throw the football effectively. The legs wouldn't be there, and the want to wouldn't be there, obviously, but they're just different than anybody else in their respective sports in terms of what they do. And Durant's certainly that guy. No, he's incredible. And just look at what Brooklyn has done since naming Jacques Vaughn as their head coach. They're 23-7. So now you factor them into the East with the Celtics, Milwaukee, Cleveland, Philly. I mean, it's just incredibly deep in the Eastern Conference. But yeah, just look at right now the leading vote getters in the Eastern Conference, and Jason Tatum, who's a legitimate MVP candidate. In fact, I think he's still the favorite in terms of betting odds. Wouldn't even be an all-star starter at this point, right?
Right.
I mean, and you look at it and go, okay, it's Embiid, Giannis, and Durant in the front court. It's like, who sits for Tatum? I mean, and they're all kind of similar players in terms of how impactful they are.
Yeah, one of those four has to sit come off the bench, and they're all going to make
good.
It, obviously. But
yeah,
I mean, it's how do you choose? I mean, they all have more than legitimate cases to be starters, and more than legitimate cases to be at the end of the season say, "Hey, I'm the MVP of this league." It's going to be fascinating going down the stretch, and I think that there's some teams that have definitely exceeded expectations. I think that Brooklyn, everybody thought, you and myself included, I think Sap, was going to fall apart there. And since Jacques Vaughn, as you mentioned, he's done a tremendous job. That whatever he's selling, they're buying. They've also been healthy, which has been an issue for them in the past. They're two main players, at least. Ben Simmons is whatever at this point. And I think Doc Rivers has also done a nice job righting the ship in Philadelphia, who got off to a pretty rocky start. And they've been playing a lot better basketball recently too. So some teams that we were concerned about to start the year have turned things around, but there's also been some disappointing teams that have faded, Sap, like the Phoenix Suns have really, really taken on a bad skid recently. That's a team that you and I thought were not going to have a great season. They started out like a house of fire, though, no problem. And then sort of the opposite of what happened with the Nets has happened to the Suns, and they've just been going downhill and downhill.
Yeah, Booker's been banged up. Chris Paul's starting to look his age. DeAndre Ayton doesn't always seem engaged. I kind of thought this would happen last year, but they had a marvelous regular season, going 64-18 before losing to Luka in the second round of the playoffs. I think there's some issues there too. Now the team is for sale. There's a lot going on with that organization. So I think they'll plummet maybe below the 6th line. So maybe they'll be in that play-in tournament. I expect Dallas and Golden State to be 6 and above, so they're not in the play-in tournament, to go along with Memphis, New Orleans, and of course Denver. So those to me would be the 5 best teams in the Western Conference, and maybe someone else crashes the party. I mean, Minnesota's been a disappointment as well. Clippers. I think the Clippers, if Kawhi and Paul George, whenever they play, they win like, nearly 2/3 of their games. I mean, they're that good, but how often does that happen? They're kind of, in a sense, like the Lakers, although I think their roster is better constructed than the Lakers when you take out the top two players. But
oh yeah, Zubac would be the third best player in the Lakers, and he's like the fifth best player.
Yeah,
on the
they had him, and I remember
they did. They gave him away for nothing.
For nothing. I said, why did they trade this guy? That was a pretty decent player. I mean, he's a double guy. I mean, he have a 29 rebound game earlier in the season.
He's good. No, they have a good roster. Norman Powell is a very good player. He'd be the third best player in the Lakers. So
Jet, you might be the third best player. Well, I'd still give Westbrook the edge over you. He's very athletic.
He is slightly more athletic than me.
Slightly more athletic than you. But after that, you got Austin Reeves. I know Thomas Bryant's done a nice job, and some other players. I mean, Dennis Schroeder at times looks like a good player, and then other times he doesn't. It's just a weird roster. But
I could see the Lakers, Sep. They could certainly get into the play-in range because the Utah Jazz have come back to life. I still think they're going to trade off another piece, maybe a Jordan Clarkson or something like that. And try to go down a little bit further. The one team that's been shocking, I think, to everybody that hasn't sort of slowed down yet is the Sacramento Kings. Remain playing good basketball, and they haven't made the playoffs for 20 years.
Feels that way. Yeah, it's been nearly that long. I mean, you're not being hyperbolic.
No, I'm not.
No, I think the last time
Chris Webber
05-06. Yeah, 05-06. I think they snuck into the playoffs and maybe lost in the first round. They hadn't won a playoff series since 2002. And Mike Brown, in his first year as head coach at Sacramento, maybe he's a leading candidate for coach of the year. I mean, Jacques Vaughn obviously has to be in consideration. I mean, you take over and you go 23-7 after a team got off to a 2-6 start. So by definition, he's coach of the year. But yes, Sacramento's played well. And in Eastern Conference, Indiana with your guy Halliburton, they've continued to play well. They beat the Celtics at TD Garden a couple of weeks ago. So they've done a really nice job as well.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting, trade deadline here, because like we said at the top, there's only 4 teams we can look at that are clearly in tank mode. By the time the deadline comes up in early February, I think more teams are going to feel pretty comfortable with where they're at and saying, we can't really make a run at the playoffs. Let's trade off some pieces. I know a lot of teams are circling Toronto because Toronto's got, a bunch of talent on their team. Veteran talent and Van Vliet, Siakam. They're not going to trade Anunoby. They're not going to trade Scotty Barnes, even though he's had a little bit of a disappointing sophomore year so far. Wizards too with Bradley Beal. Obviously everybody talks about him being traded to. Maybe they decide to go in that tanking direction, but there could be a very good player that gets moved that changes the complete complexion of this. A months ago, or maybe a month ago, Sep, we thought that player could still be Kevin Durant. That's not going to happen at this point, considering that they're right in the mix for winning the East, and they certainly look like title contenders right now. But I think that come February, there's going to be some teams that are going to have to make some decisions on what direction they want to go in. Is it good enough to just make the playoffs, or do we want to try to get a better draft pick? And that could really shake things up because it's so close right now in the top of the East and in the top of the West.
Yeah, especially a team like Toronto, all of a sudden they fall into the draft lottery and maybe they win the draft lottery and you put Big Vic in Toronto with a lot of nice pieces. Now you've got a team that in a couple of years will be a contender again. So yeah, those are big questions that a lot of these organizations have to decide on, in the next several weeks. But, give Brooklyn credit and give ownership credit. Joe Tsai, management, they stuck to their guns and said, we're not trading Kevin Durant. We're not trading Kyrie Irving. We're not just giving these guys away. Let's make it work. And then after a really slow start, they decided to move on from Steve Nash. And it sure as hell looked like Ime Udoka was going to be the next coach of the Brooklyn Nets. And they decided not to go in that direction. And it's been a home run since Jacques Vaughn took over. So give Joe Tsai a lot of credit for, sticking to it in Brooklyn.
Yeah, they really, they weathered a humongous storm, not just from the Kyrie stuff, but from what Kyrie did, but then the way they handled it, a lot of people weren't happy with that. And then the controversy about, like you just mentioned, the Udoka stuff, and then they ended up backing out at the last minute in Jacques Vaughn. But sometimes that works out, and it's clearly worked out for Brooklyn. And, these things, you can say sometimes you fall ass backwards into something good. And for Brooklyn, that's what happened. For Cleveland, they were aggressive in going out and getting Donovan Mitchell, and that looks like a home run move for them too. So, there's different approaches to being successful in the NBA. And I think you're seeing it with a lot of these teams, that it's not necessarily one approach means you're going to be competing for winning the conference or winning competing for a title, that there's multiple ways to build a roster. There's multiple ways to manage a team.
Absolutely. Yeah. And especially in a league that's that compacted in terms of the top teams and the top players. Like you said, there's no team that's the 2017 Golden State Warriors that just blew through the regular season and lost one game in the postseason. I mean, the last 3 NBA finals have put forth 6 different teams, and every finals has been pretty close. A game either way, and you've got a different champion. Heck, the Celtics got to the finals last year in the second round, and then in the conference finals they had to go to 7 games. So yeah, these teams are that close. There's no 2017 Warriors, or even LeBron's Heat, which looked like the best team in basketball. They won 2 championships in 4 years, but this is completely wide open, which I think is good for the league.
All right, Sap, before we get out of here, it's basically close to the midseason. So who is your MVP? We've been talking about all the candidates. Who is your personal pick for MVP?
I'm going to go with Luka because of the way I stated earlier that the truest definition, especially if he gets to like 48 wins and they're the 5 seed, then it's similar to what Jokic did with Denver the last couple of years, or especially last year, where they were the 6 seed. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be the best player on the best team, which at this point is Jason Tatum, right? And that's oftentimes been the MVP, the best player on the best team. But since it's so close, let me go with the guy who means more to his team than any other player, who, if you took his stats and just his presence off that team, what would Dallas be without Luka? They'd be out there with, you'd have the 3 worst teams in basketball all in the state of Texas: San Antonio, Houston, and Dallas. But you put Luka, obviously, and now they're a title contender. So I would go with Luka, but it would be close with Giannis, Tatum, Durant, Embiid. I mean, it'd be that close. It's going to be a fascinating race where, we're going to be waiting for that decision. In most cases, you kind of know it before it's announced. Sure. This is going to be one of these years where, one of 6 or 7 candidates could certainly make a case. Now, it'll shake out a little bit in the second half of the season, and some will distance themselves from others in terms of, especially with injuries. But right now, I'd vote for Luka.
Yeah, I'm totally okay with that. I think that, again, if you're going by the truest definition, like you said, Sap, you take him off his team's the worst team in the league. He's on the team. They're competitive. So, but I do feel the same way for Giannis. I also think Giannis is starting to even turn it up to another level. So I think as of right now, it's Luka. I'm going to say by the end of the season, it'll end up being Giannis. I do think, though, that, like we talked about earlier, there is voter fatigue, even if you didn't win it last year, and that the voters will want to vote for someone new, whether that be Tatum, whether that be Luka, whether that be Embiid. I think they would like to have a new MVP. So that might be what it comes down to, but we will see, Sap.
Yeah, I mean, it could be a career achievement award for Embiid, who's finished second back-to-back years. And look, at his highest level, he's as dominant as any player in the league. So plenty of worthy candidates.
Without a doubt. Well, that's going to do it for us here at the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap. Thanks to Full for Rest coverage. You can check out our show there and check it out wherever podcasts are found. Check out on at JohnSap25 at Jet Stryer, and we will be back with a new podcast next week. We're happy to be back. Thanks for listening, everybody. Talk to you later.